Some albums define a moment. Low End Theory defined a genre. It was smooth but packed a punch, experimental but still catchy, and behind it all, just a group of kids trying to perfect their sound. This is the story of A Tribe Called Quest, how they came together, how they created one of the most important albums in hip-hop history, the samples they used, and what producers today can learn from it. But before the Low End Theory, we need to take it back to where it all began. The story begins in St Albans, Queens. Jonathan Davis, later known as Q-Tip, and Malik Taylor, aka Phife Dawg, were born a month apart in 1970. They met as toddlers in church and grew up just blocks away from each other. And growing up, Phife Dawg was taking in cold crush tapes at his grandmother's house, whilst Tip was raiding his dad's jazz collection.
My dad had a pretty substantial record collection, and he would trade with my Aunt Effie, who was up in Harlem. They had a bunch of records, so I'd be like raiding everybody's joints and just listening to music.
And in the late 70s, aged 8 or 9, Tip's older sister would take him to local parties.
My mom would make my sister, who's like 6 years older than me, like take your brother with you if you're gonna go. So my sister would take me to the block parties.
And that's where he first saw DJs blending breakbeats live. Then came the first big hip hop record, and it instantly lit a fire.
You know that when Phife and I first started rhyming, we were like 9. And we heard Rap is the Life, and he was the one who encouraged me.
Tip started making pause tapes, looping breaks manually with a cassette deck and a razor-sharp ear.
I would make pause tapes, which was a big thing for kids back in the 80s to do if you had ideas for music, because we didn't have any setups, we didn't have any track machines, we didn't have any of that stuff. So what we usually had was some janky-ass stereo system that your mom's or your grandmother had.
And by the age of 11 or 12, they were already scribbling down group names, dreaming of becoming Run DMC.
We were 11, 12, just rap. I mean, we were goofing. I don't know if other kids would do this, but you have your pad and you write out what the name of the group was and who was in it.
And around that same time, they'd meet Jerobi White, the third member of the crew, and he lived just over from Phife's grandparents. It was when Q-Tip went to high school that their whole world started to open up. He'd enrolled in Murray Bergtram High School in Manhattan, a solid hour-long train ride from Queens. And he suddenly found himself surrounded by a new wave of creatives, all obsessed with hip-hop. And one of the first people he connected with was a shy, technically gifted DJ called Ali Shaheed Muhammad. And Tip decided to bring him into the fold quickly, introducing him to Phife and bringing the crew one step closer to the tribe we know.
The first time I met Phife, Q-Tip at the time had asked me to join the group, and there's a rehearsal space in Manhattan. That's where I first met Leak Ice, his name at the time, as in Malik Ice, because he was nice.
Ali had a deep love of breakbeats and a meticulous ear, and it was at that small rehearsal space where they started crafting their first demos together.
So I found this one in the city on 14th Street called Giant Rehearsal Studios. And every weekend we'd go there. Ali would bring his 4-track. We'd go there and we would record our little routines. We'd be in there working. And we had these little fucking wretched little fucking songs that we worked on.
But Ali wasn't the only person he met at Bergtram. It was where he first encountered Africa and Mike G from the Jungle Brothers. Even Brother J from X-Clan went there. By 88, Tribe were finally carving out their identity, and the name that came completely by accident during a session with the Jungle Brothers.
The group was called Quest at the time. When Tip was on the mic, he started the song by saying, "I'm from a group called Quest," and Africa was like, "Hold up." He said, "Say I'm from
A Tribe Called Quest."
And those sessions produced early tracks like Black is Black and The Promo.
Q-Tip from A Tribe Called Quest on the Jungle Brothers album. Oh yes.
And both featured on the Jungle Brothers' debut, Straight Out of the Jungle. From there, everything started to click into place. And they became part of a rising collective forming in New York, an alliance of like-minded artists. De La Soul, Jungle Brothers, Queen Latifah, all under one banner, the Native Tongues. And this wasn't just the hip-hop that people were used to. The Tongues were digging deep, hunting for rare Soul 45s and jazz fusion records.
You guys managed to miraculously avoid using anything from Breakbeat Lou's Ultimate Beats and Breaks collection, a Wikipedia, of all the records that Bam and Herc would spin back in the day. With the Native Tongues, this is the first time that I'm hearing loops that aren't on that compilation.
Meanwhile, Tip and the group were introduced to legendary radio DJ, Cool DJ Red Alert, who was the uncle of Jungle Brothers Mike G. He started playing their demos on air, which helped to spread their name across the city. And this is where the labels started getting interested. A deal with Geffen Records nearly happened but fell through. Eventually, though, they landed at Jive. Not because it was the biggest offer, but because it came with what mattered the most to them: creative freedom. Tribe's first single after signing their deal was Description of a Fool, released in late 1989.
What you got to do with yourself? Can't you be somebody else?
And it got a lot of play in the New York and tri-state area, but barely made a dent outside of college radio. And by the time their debut dropped in April 1990, it was clear this wasn't just your typical rap album. Narrated by Jerobi, it played like a concept record, drawing inspiration from jazz, soul and funk LPs from the late 60s and early 70s. And most of the tracks from that album were based on demos Q-Tip and Ali had been shaping for years. Soulful, playful, and psychedelic. But one voice was noticeably absent. Fife wasn't featured much on the debut, with Q-Tip handling most of the writing.
I was still just running around being a knucklehead. I wasn't really coming to the studio like that, still running around doing what 18-year-olds do, I guess. Fresh out of high school and just tripping.
Even so, tracks like Bonita Apple Bomb, Can I Kick It, and the bizarre I Left My Wallet in El Segundo helped them build a cult following. And the album also earned 5 mics in the Source, a rare honour at the time. Yet Tribe still felt like outsiders, a little too weird for the mainstream. However, that would change soon because the next record was where it all came together.
In theory, we got it from the 808s. That's synonymous with hip-hop.
By early 1991, A Tribe Called Quest was standing at the edge of something new. Their debut had already set them apart, but this time they wanted something stripped back, punchier, more focused. And between the release of their first album and recording their second, 2 major events had taken place. First of all, Phife Dawg had stepped into the spotlight. He barely featured on the first album, but now after a serious health scare and a moment where he almost quit the group, Q-Tip managed to pull him back in. Second of all, Jerobi had left the group completely as he wanted to attend culinary school. And the recording of Low End Theory took place at Calliope and Battery Studios in New York. And behind the boards was engineer Bob Power, the quietly essential force shaping the native tongue sound.
Bob Powell's the best engineer we've ever worked with. It's so effortless for him. Went up in the studio, hit a couple of gadgets, a couple of buttons, and sound used to always come out just beautiful.
And at the time, digital samplers were still pretty primitive, with only a short amount of sampling time. And that meant Tribe were working with fragments. Loops, one-bar chops, micro phrases, and Bob called himself an architect or a construction superintendent. His job? To make it all fit together. On this follow-up record, Q-Tip decided he wanted to include live instrumentation, so he gave legendary jazz bassist Ron Carter a call.
Q-Tip called me one day and he said, "Mr. Carter," I said, "Yes, we're putting a record together next month and I'd like you to be on this record with us. We can talk about my terms." I said, "The language you use has to be the kind that I would approve of. And it's not what I want to hear. I will be under that exit sign before you can breathe."
Behind the scenes, they were layering sounds in subtle ways, such as doubling the kicks and snares for way more punch. But it wasn't about booming sounds, it's about finding that perfect balance. And one now legendary mix trick, the Bob Power technique. He'd use something called parallel compression on the kick, blending a hard compressed version under the original, which would help to add impact without losing dynamics. Then he'd reach for a Pultec EQ, boosting at around 60 or 100 Hertz, and then sometimes cutting at the same frequency, which would help to tighten the bottom end instead of bloating it. Finally, the API 550 AEQ helped shape the mids, letting everything below it breathe. The result, a low end you didn't just hear, you felt. And 30 years later, it still punches through your speakers. A blueprint for so many future records. Now I want to take a look at one of the tracks from the album and how and why it was built the way it was. So let's talk about Bugging Out.
Microphone check 1 2, what is this? The 5-foot assassin with the roughneck business. I float like gravity.
And if you want to hear the shift from Tribe's first album to the Low End Theory, this is the perfect track. The production's completely stripped back. A chopped bass line, a drum break, and that's it. And the bass line comes from a 1977 jazz fusion track, and that's Minya in the Mooch by Jack Deonette's Directions. And it's an upright bass part that's been chopped into this hypnotic kind of rhythm. Then you've got the drums, and those are taken from Spinning Well by Lonnie Smith. And they've been chopped and resequenced for that perfect swing. And both the drums and the bass have been really slammed to give it that punch. It's really simple, but that's the point. Compared to the layered, more psychedelic vibe of the first album, it's a perfect example of how the Low End Theory wasn't about doing more, it was about doing less, better. Now before we move on, just a quick side note. If you're into this sound, I actually make my own samples too. One of them was even used on Phife Dawg's album Forever, which you can see just behind me there. And that was used on the track Dear Dilla Reprise.
They living off of hooks, skinny jean crooks, pre-K lyrics. But go on and read a book. I reminisce.
So if you want to grab yourself some samples that feel like this, soulful, textured, and perfect for flipping, I just dropped a special bundle called the Full Platter. 3 sample packs for the price of 1, 30 full compositions, normally £75, but you can grab it for 25. We actually sold out of the first 50 really quickly, so we've put up another 20. But once those are gone, that's it. So if you want to grab it, I'll do that now, and the link for that is in the description. Not only is the Low End Theory an incredible album, it's also a production masterclass. And here are 5 key lessons I think producers can take away from it today. First up, less can be more. A lot of the beats on the Low End Theory are deceptively simple. 1 sample, clean drums, and minimal layers. But it works because everything has a purpose. Focus on what makes a loop special, and strip away anything that doesn't add to it. Just try to build around a single idea instead of overproducing. Number 2, use space as a tool. Bob Power mixed like a jazz arranger. Every element had its own frequency range and rhythmic roll, and that gave the tracks clarity and punch without even needing tons of effects. So when mixing, think about the frequency space that different instruments are occupying. Carve out space with EQ, and don't let the sounds compete for the same range. Right, number 3, mono can hit harder. A lot of the sounds in Low End Theory sit in mono or near mono. Why? Because wide stereo can weaken drums and bass, especially in boom bap. Try mixing your key elements like kicks, snares, and bass dead center, and use stereo only when it adds subtle texture, not just adding width for the sake of it. Number 4, make the low end work. The album's bass isn't loud, it's tight and controlled, and that's thanks to that Bob Power trick. Parallel compression on the kick, then subtle Pultec EQ, boosting and cutting around the same low frequency to tighten it. So duplicate your kick, compress it hard, and then blend it underneath. Then use EQ to shape the low end, not just to boost it. And number 5, blend live and sampled sounds. Try brought in Ron Carter on the upright bass. Not to stand out, but to blend into the loop just like a sample. And that hybrid approach gave the album a really nice texture that wasn't heard at the time. So use live instruments and MIDI parts and treat them like samples. Filter them, process them, and make them fit into the world of your track. So if you've enjoyed this video and found it useful, if you're a producer or a beat maker interested in this sort of thing, we've just started our own Discord community, which is a great space to ask questions, share samples, collaborate, and I'd love to see some of you guys there. If you'd like to join that, the link for that is in the description. Likewise, if you need some new samples for your beats, that Full Platter pack is available now, and the link is in the description. And also let me know in the comments if there's any producers or artists you want me to look at next.